The mysterious visitor. David Carter had lived alone on his farm for years. He liked the quiet. The only sounds were the wind through the trees and the distant howls of wolves. But that night, something was different. The storm had passed hours ago, but the air still smelled like rain. David sat on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee, when he heard it, a faint, rustling sound near the barn. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote looking for food. But then he heard something else. Breathing. Ragged. Weak. Desperate. David stood up. His instincts, sharpened by years as a soldier, told him something was wrong. He grabbed his flashlight and walked toward the barn. His boots crunched against the wet grass. The air felt heavy, like something unseen was watching him. Then he saw it. A figure lay near the barn door, half hidden in the shadows. It was curled up, shaking. At first, David thought it was a person, maybe a lost traveler. But as he stepped closer, the flashlight revealed the truth. It wasn't human. The creature had silver blue skin that shimmered under the light. Its limbs were long and thin, almost delicate. Dark bruises and deep cuts covered its body, as if it had been running or fighting for its life. Its breathing was shallow, and its fingers twitched slightly in the dirt. David's heart pounded. Was this real? Was he dreaming? The creature slowly lifted its head. Glowing violet eyes stared up at him, eyes filled with fear. David froze. The alien was terrified of him. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stared, weak and helpless. His first instinct was to run back to the house, call someone. The military, the police, anyone. But another part of him, the part that had seen too much war, told him to stay. This thing, no, this person, wasn't attacking him. It was hurt, and it was starving. David exhaled. What the hell was he supposed to do? He kneeled beside the creature, moving slowly so he wouldn't scare it. Up close, he saw just how bad its condition was. Its ribs were showing. Its lips, if that's what they were dry and cracked. "Can you understand me?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The alien's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, its body shuddered. A soft, painful sound escaped its throat. It was too weak to respond. David cursed under his breath. It needed food, water, shelter. He wasn't sure if this was a smart decision, but he wasn't the type to let someone die if he could help it. He took off his jacket and carefully placed it over the alien's shoulders. It flinched at first, but didn't resist. "Come on," he muttered. "Let's get you inside." Slowly, he lifted the alien into his arms. It was lighter than he expected, fragile like a wounded bird. As he carried it toward the house, the creature's head rested against his chest, its breath shallow and weak. David's mind raced. What was he doing? Was this a mistake? What if it was dangerous? What if more of them were out there? But as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him, he knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. The silent bond. David laid the alien gently on his old leather couch. His heart was still pounding, his mind racing with questions. He had no answers, only the weight of the strange, fragile being in front of him. The creature shivered under his jacket, its silver blue skin still cold to the touch. Up close, David could see its delicate features, a face that was almost human, but with a strange, otherworldly beauty. The hunters arrive. The night seemed to stretch on forever, as if time itself had slowed. David paced the small living room, occasionally glancing at Lyra, who sat motionless on the couch, her eyes still locked onto the stars. He couldn't stop thinking about the ship he had seen. The hum still lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder that they weren't alone. Lyra's fearful gaze only made him more certain that whatever was coming was something he couldn't fight alone. Lyra shifted suddenly, her violet eyes flashing toward the window. She looked like she had heard something that David couldn't quite catch. Her breath quickened, and her fingers tightened around the edge of the couch. "What is it?" David asked, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood up, her movements slow and careful, as if every step caused her pain. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at the window. Then, with a trembling hand, she pointed toward the sky. David followed her finger, but all he saw was the vastness of the night, a few distant stars twinkling in the endless black. And then he saw it. A dot in the sky, growing larger. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. This was something else, something that didn't belong to Earth. A sudden, unnatural chill ran down David's spine. He knew now. They had found her. The ship wasn't alone. The air seemed to thicken as two more shapes emerged from the shadows. The ships were large and sleek, their dark hulls reflecting the faint light of distant stars. They moved silently, hovering just above the trees, their engines purring with a low hum. There were no lights, no sound except the mechanical buzz that made the hair on the back of David's neck stand up. David's hand instinctively went to his rifle, now hanging by the door. He checked the ammo quickly, his heart racing. 3 ships. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this kind of fight, but he didn't have much choice. Lyra. She didn't answer him. She was staring out the window, her face pale. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, her body shook slightly, her breath quickening in panic. David stepped toward her. "Lyra, listen to me. We need to get out of here. Now." But she didn't move. Then, without warning, she collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. A sharp, painful cry escaped her lips. David rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "They're coming for me. They won't stop." David's grip tightened around her shoulder. He could feel the fear radiating from her, a fear that wasn't just of the ships outside, but something deeper, something personal. "I won't let them take you." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there. Regret. She shook her head slowly. "It's too late. They're already here." Just then, a flash of light lit up the sky. The ships had opened their hatches. Figures in dark, armor-like suits began to drop from the vessels, landing silently on the ground. They were tall, too tall for normal humans, their movements swift and precise. They carried weapons that glowed with an eerie light, pulsing with energy. David felt his heart race. Bounty hunters. The figures stood still for a moment, scanning the area. Their helmets gleamed in the dim light, reflecting the moon. David couldn't see their faces, but he didn't need to. He could feel the danger in their presence. Without hesitation, the lead hunter raised a hand, signaling for the others to spread out. The group moved like a coordinated unit, methodical in their search. They didn't seem to care about anything but finding their target. And Lyra, it seemed, was that target. David's mind raced. There was no way he could fight all of them. They were too many, and they were too well prepared. He needed a plan. He needed to protect Lyra. "We have to move. Now." David grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her to her feet. She didn't resist, but her eyes were filled with a sense of helplessness. It was as if she knew there was no escaping this, no running from her past. "I'm not leaving you, Lyra. We're in this together." She didn't say anything, but he felt a shift in her, a small, almost imperceptible nod. Together, they moved toward the back door. David opened it cautiously, peeking out into the night. The bounty hunters were close, but they hadn't reached the house yet. There was still time to get away. "Through the woods. We'll hide," David whispered. Lyra's eyes flickered to the forest beyond the house. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before nodding again. They slipped out into the cold night air, moving quickly but quietly through the tall grass. Behind them, the hunters continued to search, their voices distant but growing louder. They were closing in. David could hear his heart pounding in his chest. The darkness of the forest swallowed them whole, But it wouldn't be enough to hide them for long. He had to keep them moving. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy above them. The ground beneath their feet was wet and uneven, but they had no choice but to keep going. And then they heard it. A low, mechanical hum. David's blood ran cold. The ships had followed them into the forest. The hunters had found them. Escape and secrets. The forest was alive with shadows. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. But all David could hear was his own heartbeat, fast, steady, and full of adrenaline. Behind them, the bounty hunters moved like phantoms, their footsteps silent but their presence impossible to ignore. They were closing in. David and Lyra pushed forward, their breath visible in the cold night air. She was still weak, her body struggling with every step, but she didn't stop. She knew what would happen if she did. David's boots crunched against wet leaves as he turned to look behind them. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, but in the distance, dark figures moved through the fog. The hunters were scanning the area with strange, glowing devices, tracking them. "Damn it, they can see us," David muttered. Lyra stumbled slightly, gripping onto his arm for balance. She was exhausted. He could feel it in the way she clung to him, like someone running on the last bit of their strength. "Just a little farther," he whispered. She looked up at him, her violet eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place, a mix of gratitude and something else, something deeper. Then, a sharp voice pierced the silence. "They're close. Sweep left. Do not let the target escape." David felt Lyra's body go rigid. The voice was deep, metallic, laced with something unnatural. It wasn't human. "They won't stop," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. David gritted his teeth. "Then we'll make them stop." He scanned their surroundings. If they kept running, the hunters would catch them. He needed to think fast. Then he saw it, a fallen tree, massive and rotting, just large enough to provide cover. He pulled Lyra down behind it, pressing his back against the damp wood. They sat in silence. In the distance, the sound of footsteps grew louder. David reached for his rifle, his hand steady despite the tension. Lyra pressed against the log, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. He could see the fear in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, she whispered, "I have to tell you something." David looked at her. "Now." She swallowed hard. "If I die tonight, you need to know." David's grip tightened around his rifle. "Not happening. You're not dying tonight." Lyra didn't seem convinced. She hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely audible. "I am not just running from them, David. I am running for your people." David frowned. "What does that mean?" Lyra closed her eyes. "My kind. The Icarans, we are not explorers. We are conquerors." David felt a chill run through his spine. "You're saying they're planning something?" She nodded, guilt flashing in her glowing eyes. "Your world is marked. The Icaran fleet is already watching from the void. They sent me here to prepare for their arrival. But I discovered the truth too late." David stared at her, the weight of her words crushed down on him like a boulder. "Invasion," he whispered. Lyra lowered her head. "I refuse to help them. I tried to stop it. That's why they want me dead." Everything clicked into place. The scars on her body, the desperation in her voice, the relentless pursuit. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was a traitor to her own people. David exhaled sharply. Earth wasn't just in danger. Earth was already doomed unless something changed. But right now, they had bigger problems. Just as he was about to respond, a bright light cut through the trees. The bounty hunters had found them. "Move," David hissed, grabbing Lyra's wrist and pulling her forward. They darted through the underbrush, zigzagging between trees. The light beams tracked them, sweeping through the forest like spotlights. Then, a shot rang out. A bolt of energy struck the tree beside them, exploding in a shower of sparks. David didn't stop. He couldn't. Lyra gasped beside him, struggling to keep up. "David, not now. Keep running." Another shot. Closer. Then he heard something worse. A low, mechanical whirring filled the air. David looked up just in time to see a drone descending from the treetops. It was small, insect-like, its glowing red eye locking onto them like a predator sizing up its prey. Before he could react, the drone let out a loud, piercing sound, an alarm. Crap. More footsteps. More voices. They were surrounded. David skidded to a stop. Lyra nearly crashed into him. He spun, raising his rifle. He could make out 3 hunters emerging from the fog, weapons raised. Their helmets gleamed in the dim light, faceless and cold. One of them stepped forward, his voice modulated and inhuman. "Target acquired. Step forward, traitor. The sentence is death." Lyra stiffened beside him. David looked at her, then at them. He raised his rifle. "Over my dead body." The leader tilted his head. "That can be arranged." Then, all hell broke loose. The hunters opened fire. David grabbed Lyra and dove behind a tree. Bolts of energy ripped through the air, burning holes through the bark. The forest lit up with flashes of white-blue light as David returned fire, his rifle kicking against his shoulder. One shot hit the nearest hunter square in the chest. He staggered but didn't fall. His armor absorbed the impact. David cursed. These weren't just bounty hunters. They were soldiers. Then, Lyra did something unexpected. She lifted her hands, and for the first time, David saw power pulse through her veins. A faint glow ran along her arms, crackling like electricity. She thrust her hands forward, and suddenly, a wave of energy blasted toward the nearest hunter. He flew backward, slamming into a tree with a sickening crunch. David barely had time to react before Lyra collapsed, her energy spent. The remaining 2 hunters were recovering fast. David clenched his teeth. They wouldn't last much longer. He had to make a choice. Fight to the death, or run. The last stand. David didn't think. There was no time. The bounty hunters were recovering fast. Lyra lay beside him, gasping for breath, her body still trembling from the surge of energy she had used. She was completely drained. David's grip tightened around his rifle. The odds were stacked against them. The hunters were faster, stronger, and better equipped. But if they wanted Lyra, they would have to go through him first. The leader of the bounty hunters straightened, his armor gleaming under the eerie blue glow of his weapon. "You are outnumbered. Surrender." His voice was cold, mechanical, almost bored. David grinned. "Yeah, I've been outnumbered before. Didn't end well for the other guys." Without waiting for a response, he fired first. His bullet slammed into the hunter's shoulder, staggering him back. But it wasn't enough. The alien barely reacted, his armor absorbing the impact. David barely had time to roll before a blast of energy sizzled past him, scorching the tree behind him. He hit the ground hard, twisting to return fire. The second hunter lunged, moving faster than any human should. David barely got his rifle up in time, using it as a shield as the alien swung a blade at his throat. A blade? These bastards weren't just using guns. They wanted this fight up close and personal. David gritted his teeth, pushing back with all his strength. The hunter was stronger, but David had training. He twisted, using the hunter's momentum against him, and slammed the butt of his rifle into its helmet. The alien stumbled back. That was all the time David needed. Boom! A single, well-placed shot tore through the hunter's exposed neck. He collapsed, armor sparking, his blade slipping from his grip. One down. David barely had a second to react before the leader came at him, moving with terrifying speed. The bounty hunter slammed into him, knocking the rifle from his hands. David hit the ground hard, the wind rushing from his lungs. The alien loomed over him, energy blade raised. David rolled, narrowly avoiding the deadly arc of the weapon. The blade sliced through the earth where he had been lying just a second before. Too close. David scrambled to his feet, breathing hard. His knife was still strapped to his leg. It wasn't much, but it was something. The bounty hunter lunged again. David dodged, twisting around the attack, and in one swift motion, he drove his knife into the weak spot beneath the alien's arm. The bounty hunter let out a metallic roar, staggering back. David didn't stop. He grabbed the fallen energy blade from the dead hunter and turned the weapon against its owner. The leader barely had time to react before David buried the blade deep into his chest. The alien went still. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the body collapsed. The final bounty hunter, seeing his leader fall, hesitated. David, covered in sweat and dirt, pointed the energy blade at him. His voice was deadly calm. "Run." The hunter didn't need to be told twice. He turned and disappeared into the forest, vanishing into the darkness. David exhaled, his entire body aching. It was over. For now. The cost of victory. David turned toward Lyra. She hadn't moved. His stomach clenched as he dropped to his knees beside her. Lyra. Her eyes flickered open, barely. Her breathing was shallow. David's hands hovered over her, unsure what to do. "Stay with me. You're gonna be fine." She gave him a weak smile. "You fight well, human." "Damn right I do. Now stop talking like you're about to die." Lyra exhaled softly. "I gave you some of my energy." David frowned. "What?" She reached up, pressing a weak hand against his chest. And suddenly, he felt it. A strange warmth pulsed through him. Something foreign, something powerful. It was like a second heartbeat, thrumming beneath his skin. His wounds didn't ache as much. His body felt lighter, stronger. Lyra's hand fell away, and her glowing violet eyes locked onto his. "You carry part of me now, David. You are more than you were." David didn't understand. Not yet. But he knew one thing. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Somewhere out there, Lyra's people were still coming. And now, David had a war to fight. A new power, a new destiny. The night had never felt so silent. The forest, once filled with whispers of wind and distant sounds of life, now felt eerily still. David knelt beside Lyra, his heart pounding from both the battle and the strange energy still pulsing through his veins. The glow of the alien energy blade in his hand had begun to fade, flickering with the last remnants of the life he had taken. Lyra lay weak, her silver-blue skin dimmer than before. She had given him something. Something powerful. David clenched his fists, trying to understand the new sensation inside him. His wounds should have hurt more, but they didn't. He should have been exhausted, but instead, his body felt charged, like he had been running on adrenaline, but it wasn't fading. Lyra's glowing violet eyes barely stayed open as she looked at him. She tried to speak but coughed instead, her body still trembling from the strain of whatever she had done. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed her wrist, his touch firm but careful. "What did you do to me?" Her lips curled into a weak smile. "I saved you, and you saved me. We are bound now." David shook his head. "Bound? What the hell does that mean?" Lyra exhaled, struggling to sit up. Her breathing was labored, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just weak, she was fading. Her silver-blue skin, once radiant, looked paler. David's grip on her wrist tightened. "Lyra, tell me the truth." She blinked slowly, as if gathering the strength to speak. "My kind, we do not just die. Our energy, our essence must go somewhere. If we give it freely, it can merge." David's stomach twisted. He glanced down at his hands. The warmth he felt, was it her? "You transferred your energy to me." It wasn't a question. He knew it now. Lyra nodded weakly. "I had no choice. You were dying. And I did not want to be alone." Her voice cracked on the last word. David's chest tightened. She wasn't just talking about this moment. She had been alone for a long time, running, hunted, betrayed by her own people. And now she had given up part of herself to save him. David swallowed hard. What does this mean for you? What happens now? Lyra's gaze softened. I am still here, just not as I was before. For the first time, David truly felt her inside him. Not just physically, but something deeper. It wasn't like hearing a voice in his head, but rather a presence. Lyra wasn't dying. She was becoming part of him. The awakening. David closed his eyes, his mind racing. He needed to focus. He needed to understand. The power she had given him, it wasn't just making him stronger, it was changing him. His heartbeat sounded different, deeper, steady, powerful. His senses were sharper. He could hear things he couldn't before. The distant hum of the retreating bounty hunter's ship, the faint rustle of a rabbit in the underbrush. He opened his eyes and gasped. The world looked different, brighter. Every shape, every shadow had an energy to it, something he had never noticed before. The trees pulsed with life. The ground beneath him thrummed with something ancient. He looked at his hands again. The faintest trace of silver-blue energy flickered beneath his skin, just for a second. David Carter was no longer just human. He was something more. Lyra's last words. Lyra sighed, exhaustion taking over her body. You must listen, David. There isn't much time. David leaned closer, his jaw tight. Time for what? She swallowed hard. Earth is in danger. My people, they are coming. David already knew this, but the way she said it made his blood turn cold. When? Lyra hesitated. Soon. I do not know exactly, but they are preparing. They know I am missing. They know I have broken the order. David exhaled sharply. They wouldn't stop. They wouldn't give up. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Earth. David had spent most of his life as a soldier. He had fought in wars, seen good men die. But this was different. Then we have to warn them. We have to prepare. Lyra nodded weakly. You are the only one who can. David frowned. Why me? Lyra's eyes met his, glowing faintly. Because you carry my essence now. You are a guardian, the first of your kind. The word guardian sent a shiver through David's spine. A guardian, a protector, a warrior. He had spent his life trying to find a reason to fight. Now he had one. The choice. David stood up slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He wasn't sure if he even understood what he had become. But he knew one thing. The fight wasn't over. He turned to Lyra. You said I'm not just human anymore. What does that mean? What am I capable of? Lyra's expression was unreadable. You will have to discover that for yourself. But know this, David. They will come for you now. You are no longer just a man. You are a threat to them. David smirked. Good. Let them come. He reached down, grabbing the energy blade from the fallen hunter. It still hummed faintly in his grip. Lyra's people wanted war. They had no idea what they were up against. For the first time in his life, David felt truly alive. He wasn't running anymore. He was ready to fight. Next stop. War. The sky was still dark, but David knew dawn was coming. The invasion was inevitable, but Earth would not fall. Not while he was still breathing. Not while he carried the power of something beyond human. David Carter, the first guardian of Earth, was ready, and he was bringing the fight to them. A guardian is born. The wind carried the scent of burnt ozone and blood. The forest, once a place of silence and stillness, had become a battleground. The bodies of the alien bounty hunters lay motionless in the dirt, their armor cracked, their weapons shattered. The only sounds left were the distant hum of retreating ships and the slow, steady breath of David Carter, the first guardian of Earth. He stood at the edge of the clearing, gripping the energy blade tightly. The weapon still hummed with life, pulsing faintly in his grasp. His own body felt different, stronger, faster, more alive than it had ever been before. The energy Lyra had given him still thrummed beneath his skin, making him feel like he was standing on the edge of something far greater than himself. And yet, when he turned back toward Lyra, he felt the weight of something deeper. She was fading. Not dying. No, that wasn't the right word. She had already become a part of him, her essence now bound to his. But her physical body, it was growing weaker. Translucent, as if she was slowly slipping away from this world and into another. David knelt beside her, his jaw tightening. "Stay with me, Lyra." His voice was low, firm. She gave a weak smile. "I am with you, David. Always." He shook his head. "That's not enough. You don't get to just disappear. We're not done yet." Her violet eyes softened. "You don't understand. My body, it was never meant to last. The energy I gave you." She winced, pain flickering across her face. "It was the last of me. But my spirit, my mind, my essence, it remains. You carry me now." David's chest tightened. "Then what do I do?" Lyra's fading fingers brushed against his arm. "You fight. You prepare. Earth is not ready for what is coming. But you are." David exhaled sharply, staring at the distant horizon. The invasion. Somewhere, high above them, beyond the stars, the Icaran fleet was waiting. Watching. Preparing. They had lost their bounty hunters tonight, but that wouldn't stop them. This was only the beginning. The first test. A low rumble filled the air. David's head snapped up. The sky above the forest crackled, and a deep red light split through the darkness. Another ship. This one was different. Bigger. Sleeker. It wasn't a scout. It was a warning. Lyra's voice echoed in his mind, even though her lips never moved. "They are testing you." David's grip tightened around the energy blade. His entire body reacted instantly, his senses sharper, his muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike. The ship hovered above the treetops, its hull sleek and black, absorbing all light around it. Then, without warning, it fired. A pulse of crimson energy ripped through the trees, sending a shockwave that flattened the clearing. David barely had time to move. He dove to the side, rolling to avoid the impact. The ground where he had been standing a second ago was now a crater of smoking dirt. He exhaled, then gritted his teeth. They weren't just testing him. They were trying to kill him. David rose to his feet, gripping his blade tightly. The energy within him responded, pulsing with raw power. He could feel Lyra guiding him. "Trust yourself, David. Trust what I have given you." Another shot. This time, David didn't dodge. He reacted, faster than he ever had before. His body moved on instinct, twisting just as the blast struck, his blade humming as it met the beam. And instead of disintegrating, he deflected it. The energy blade absorbed the impact, sending the blast flying back toward the ship. David barely had time to process what had happened before the ship lurched to the side, avoiding its own attack. He smirked. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Becoming the Guardian. The ship didn't fire again. It hovered for a moment longer, then began to rise. David narrowed his eyes. "They're leaving." "No," Lyra's voice whispered in his mind. "They are reporting back." David exhaled, gripping his blade so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't over. The Icarans had seen what he could do. They had measured his strength. And now, they would come in force. The ship disappeared into the clouds, vanishing as quickly as it had come. The forest fell silent once more. David stood alone, watching the sky. The weight of what had happened, asterisk of what was coming, asterisk settled over him like a storm cloud. Then, slowly, he sheathed the energy blade and turned back toward the farmhouse. There was no more running. It was time to prepare. The final stand awaits. As dawn broke over the horizon, David Carter knew that his life as a simple man was over. He had been given something rare, something powerful, a second chance, a purpose. He was no longer just a man. He was a guardian, and when the Ekeran fleet came to claim Earth, they would find him waiting.